So entering a traditional marriage today is it's kind of like blindly clicking agree on the terms of service for a new app on your phone.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Nobody reads those.
Right. You just scroll right past all the dense legalistic jargon because you just want to use the app. But, and this is the core of what we're looking at today, what if that fine print you completely ignored actually signs away your bodily autonomy?
Which is a terrifying thought.
It really is. Like, are we as a culture just blindly accepting a literal contract of ownership simply because it comes wrapped up in this guise of, beautiful tradition and romance?
That's such a staggering premise to start with.
Yeah.
And to really unpack it, we have to peel back all those romanticized layers of an institution that, pretty much every human culture treats as completely foundational.
Yeah.
The ideas we are examining in this deep dive are intensely provocative. They really require looking past the wedding ceremonies, the cultural celebrations, and looking straight down into the cold structural mechanics of what marriage actually is, from a strictly legal and philosophical standpoint.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to guide you, the listener, through that totally unvarnished reality. So we are looking at a deeply critical, very controversial 2026 talk by the spiritual teacher Acharya Prashant.
Right, and we should give this specific context for that talk.
Yeah, please do.
So Prashant is actually responding to this massive cultural and legal debate that was happening in India at the time. It was sparked by a web series called Chiraya, which really brought the theme of marital rape into the mainstream public consciousness.
Which is a heavy, very sensitive topic.
It is, extremely. And in the specific Indian legal context he is discussing, the penal code has historically contained an explicit exception that basically refuses to criminalize marital rape, provided the wife is over the age of 18.
Wait, so the law actually carves out an exception specifically for marriage?
Yes. The legal precedent essentially treats sexual access as an inherent, unquestionable component of the marriage contract itself. And I want to be clear here. We aren't taking a political side or endorsing this view. We are just looking at how Prashant analyzes this reality.
Right, we're just impartially exploring his perspective on these sources. But that specific legal reality is kind of the anchor for his entire philosophical breakdown, isn't it?
It absolutely is, because when you or I think of marriage, we usually picture a shared life, right? Mutual support, maybe building a family.
Love, companionship, all that good stuff.
Exactly. We rarely consider the fact that the courts, the actual legal architecture, view it fundamentally as a binding contract regarding physical access. And Prashant points out something entirely counterintuitive here.
Okay, what's that?
Well, he doesn't criticize the lawmakers for being deceitful or, archaic. He actually argues that they're being refreshingly structurally honest.
Honest? Honest in the sense that they just aren't hiding the ball.
Precisely. By explicitly refusing to criminalize marital rape, he says the lawmakers are stating plainly that the very foundation of the institution of marriage, as defined legally and traditionally, is the husband's ownership of the wife's body.
Wow. Okay, the implication there is just jarring.
It is.
Because it means the entire load-bearing wall of this ancient institution isn't love at all, or even partnership. It's just ownership.
Ownership, yeah. And he argues that if marital rape were to be criminalized, the institution of marriage, at least the way society currently engineers it, would essentially just collapse.
It's a huge claim.
He goes so far as to call the law neat.
Neat. That sounds like a really strange word to use for something so dark.
I know, but he means it in the sense that the blueprints of the machinery are completely out in the open. It's tidy. His stance, and again, this is very controversial, is that society, through its penal codes and traditional expectations, has provided the rules in writing.
So there's no secret agenda?
Right. He says if a woman enters into this institution, she is stepping into a space where the fine print has already been published. Therefore, he argues, no one can claim they were cheated or tricked. The reality of the arrangement, that bodily ownership transfers once the knot is tied, is publicly available information.
Okay, I really have to push back on that logic, though. I mean, you cannot expect a young woman, or anyone for that matter, who has been conditioned by decades of romantic cultural narratives to just go consult the penal code before getting married.
That's a very fair point.
Right.
Yeah.
People don't read legal statutes. They read poetry. They look at their family's expectations. Calling the system neat or honest feels like giving society a free pass for running a massively deceptive marketing campaign.
A marketing campaign. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because you're sold a fairy tale, but you're delivered a property transfer. Isn't it incredibly harsh to say women are responsible for feeling cheated just because the law is technically on the book somewhere?
It is harsh, very harsh. But Prashant is diagnosing what he sees as a systemic delusion, not necessarily blaming the individual for being naive. I mean, he acknowledges that people enter expecting a loving partnership.
But he still holds them accountable.
Yes, he is demanding this radical level of personal responsibility. He is essentially saying, look at the machine you are walking into. Don't look at the paint job. Look at the gears.
Ah, okay. The societal conditioning, the romance, the family expectations, that's the paint job.
Exactly. And the legal reality of bodily ownership is the gears.
But the societal pressure to ignore those gears is just immense. If you pause to question the fine print before a wedding, you are often accused of ruining the romance or, disrespecting tradition.
Which is why the shock and betrayal felt later, when the reality of that ownership becomes apparent, is so devastating. Prashant's argument is that as long as we willingly prioritize the cultural paint job over the legal blueprint, we are participating in our own subjugation.
We refuse to look at the contract before signing it because we desperately want to believe the fairy tale.
That's it exactly. We want the fairy tale.
Okay, but if the underlying machinery of this contract is based on ownership rather than a mutual loving partnership, that creates a massive logistical problem for society. Like, how do you convince millions of people to continually sign this contract?
You have to build a pipeline.
Right. You need a pipeline. And that pipeline leads us directly into his scathing critique of how marriages are actually formed, specifically within the arranged marriage system.
Yeah, and we should note he does briefly touch on modern love marriages, but he largely dismisses them as mostly just being based on physical lust or superficial attraction.
So he's not a fan of those either.
Not really, no.
Mm-hmm.
But his sharpest critique is definitely reserved for arranged marriages, which he calls a joke that no one laughs at.
A joke no one laughs at. That's a heavy line.
To understand why he uses such strong language, we have to look at the paradox he highlights regarding the typical trajectory of what society would call a cultured girl in these traditional systems.
Because the conditioning for her starts from day one.
It does. She is sheltered her entire life. She might be kept entirely away from the gaze or touch of any men outside her immediate family.
Right.
She is deeply conditioned to believe that a stranger's touch is strictly forbidden, that it's even sinful. There is this immense, decades-long psychological wall built up to keep her separate from the opposite sex.
And then the whiplash of what happens next is just profound.
Oh, it's total whiplash.
Because society suddenly takes that deeply sheltered girl and hands her over to a complete stranger, and overnight, literally overnight, the absolute prohibition on touch is flipped into a mandatory requirement for intense sexual intimacy.
That is the core of the cognitive dissonance Prashant is exposing here. These two people have never truly connected. They haven't learned about each other's inner lives.
They haven't even talked alone, usually.
Right? They haven't, as he poetically describes it in the text, flown together or had their consciousness dance together. There's absolutely no foundational love because, well, they are strangers.
Yeah.
Yet, within the legal framework they've just entered, sex is legally required. In fact, a lack of sexual intimacy is valid legal grounds for divorce in this system.
Wow. So if you are listening to this right now, I want you to try and put yourself in that exact psychological space. You spend your entire life being warned that the stove will burn you. You're terrified of the stove.
Yeah.
Then one day, society physically throws you into a fire and demands that you experience it as a warm hug. It is a staggering expectation. Like, how does a human brain even reconcile that overnight?
It doesn't. It really doesn't. And that is the tragedy he's pointing to. You have intimacy without love, forced by societal and legal expectation.
Which he equates to...
He equates this dynamic to a sanction violation.
Sanction violation.
Yes. Because when you force physical intimacy where no genuine spiritual or emotional connection exists, simply because a contract was signed, you are basically normalizing a trauma by dressing it up in ceremony.
God, it is really uncomfortable to sit with that realization. Just looking at two strangers legally bound to be intimate with zero emotional groundwork, which raises the inevitable question. If this system creates such jarring cognitive dissonance, why is it the dominant choice?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why do we rely on these heavy-handed institutional matches instead of doing the work to find our own partners and build genuine connections first?
His answer to that is it's characteristically blunt.
I would expect nothing less at this point.
He says people rely on the institution because they fundamentally lack the capability to love.
Wait, so it's not a matter of convenience or honoring tradition.
Yeah.
He is arguing it's an actual fundamental deficit in human capability.
Exactly. He believes genuine love is not just some default setting for humanity.
Like it doesn't just happen to you.
Right. We are culturally conditioned to think love is something you fall into, like it's an accident of fate or chemistry. You meet someone, you click, you fall in love. Prashant argues the complete opposite.
What does he say it is then?
He describes true love as a very expensive thing. It requires immense effort, deep learning, and a process of what he calls rising.
Rising.
Yeah, you have to elevate your own consciousness to even be capable of truly connecting with another human being.
That completely reframes the entire concept of a relationship. I mean, if love requires that level of internal elevation, most people simply aren't doing the work.
And that is his harsh observation right there. He says that if society didn't step in to artificially arrange these marriages, many men and women would simply die virgins.
Oh, wow.
They just do not possess the internal depth, the spiritual richness, or the awareness to naturally attract a partner and form a real connection.
So they need the system.
Without the institution playing matchmaker, they would be utterly alone. Which brings us to a deeply provocative term he uses from the source text, animal husbandry.
Ah, yes, animal husbandry. He points out the literal root of the word husband and draws a direct parallel to, like, a zoo's breeding program.
He paints a very vivid, kind of brutal picture. He says, imagine a large male rhino in a zoo enclosure. The zookeepers don't wait for the rhino to develop a profound emotional connection with a mate, right?
Right, they just bring in a female.
Exactly. They simply hand him females one by one to ensure the species reproduces. It is a purely logistical matching game based entirely on biology.
And his argument is that human society operates the exact same way, just with better PR.
Better PR, yeah.
We force a male and a female into a room together simply because they have reached a certain biological age or, their families belong to the same social strata or caste. We are basically reducing human beings to livestock being managed for reproduction.
We rely on the architecture of society to hold us up, rather than building our own internal capability to connect. We basically outsource the finding of a mate to an institution because we haven't evolved past the biological imperative.
I really need to clarify this biological reduction, though. Does he believe anyone is actually capable of rising above this zoo enclosure? Or is he saying humanity is just permanently trapped in this logistical matching game forever?
No, he absolutely believes humans have the capacity to rise above it. The potential for genuine love is there in us.
Okay, good.
But the willingness to pursue it is exceedingly rare. And this brings us to the ultimate philosophical why behind everything we've discussed today. Like, why are we so unwilling to rise? Why do we desperately need society to reduce human connection to a breeding program?
There has to be a root spiritual cause.
There is. The core culprit, according to Prashant, is the human ego.
The ego, so it's not just a biological failure to launch, it is an active defensive mechanism. We are actively protecting our sense of self.
Exactly. Think about the ego's primary directive. It wants to survive, right? It wants to maintain its boundaries, its identity, its selfish demands, and its sense of always being right.
Yeah.
Well, true love is terrifying to the ego because genuine love requires ego dissolution.
Okay, what does that actually look like in practice? Because we use terms like ego dissolution, but in the context of a real relationship, like on a random Tuesday, what is the ego so afraid of?
Practically speaking, ego dissolution means you can no longer be the center of your own universe. It means, like in an argument, you have to surrender the desperate need to be right in order to truly understand the other person.
Which nobody wants to do.
Right. It means your rigid life plans, your preferences, your deeply held beliefs, they might have to be compromised or entirely dismantled to make room for another human being's reality. You have to literally melt into the experience of connection.
And that is agonizing for the ego.
It feels like a kind of death.
It's a complete surrender of the I.
And because the ego fears that surrender more than anything else in the world, it actively avoids the difficult, high-altitude path of true love. Instead, it looks for workarounds. It creates cheap, easy alternatives. And in Prashant's philosophy, the institution of arranged marriage is the ultimate safe haven for the ego.
It's like we've built a society-wide bypass surgery around the heart.
That's a great way to put it.
The institution of marriage acts as a fortress. We willingly choose this institutional path because the expensive path of real love requires us to destroy our own egos.
A fortress is the perfect analogy. Because inside that fortress, you don't have to change. You don't have to grow. You don't have to make yourself radically vulnerable.
Society just hands you a partner.
Exactly. The law guarantees your physical access to them. The culture validates you and tells you that you are fulfilling your noble duty. Your ego gets to remain completely intact, completely protected, while you reap all the biological and social benefits of being paired off.
You bypass the emotional work entirely. You pay the societal toll, walk through the gate, and declare yourself married without ever having to look inward and ask, am I actually someone who knows how to love?
Which is a terrifying question to ask yourself.
It really is. And, if you are listening to this right now and feeling a bit defensive about your own relationship, that reaction itself is exactly the ego protection Prashant is talking about. It's uncomfortable to look at your own life and wonder if you built it out of love or out of a need for a safe harbor.
It forces you to look at tradition not as a benign inheritance from your ancestors, but as an active, ongoing shield against your own spiritual growth.
Right.
The system endures not because it is beautiful, but because it is comfortable. If we had to rely solely on our ability to genuinely love another human being to find a partner, most of us would be forced into a brutal spiritual awakening. We would have to confront our own profound emptiness.
Let's take a moment to pull all these threads together, because we have covered some incredibly dense, challenging ground today.
We really have.
We started by looking at the raw legal realities of bodily autonomy. The fact that the legal refusal to criminalize marital rape openly exposes marriage at its traditional core as a contract of ownership.
A contract where the terms of service are brutal, yes, but openly published by a structurally honest legal system.
Right. And from there, we explored the psychological toll of how people are funneled into that contract. The dark paradox of arranged marriages, where a person conditioned for decades to fear touch is suddenly thrown into a room with a stranger and legally demanded to provide intimacy.
Which revealed the underlying mechanism of animal husbandry. The logistical reality that society treats human relationships like a zoo breeding program, artificially matching people up just because they haven't developed the internal capability to find love on their own.
And finally, we arrived at the root cause of it all, the ego. The realization that we use these massive, ancient institutional structures as safe havens. We use them to protect our fragile egos from the grueling, ego-dissolving work of true love. We consistently choose the cheap path to avoid the spiritual cost of the real thing.
It's a brilliant synthesis by Prashant, honestly. It connects the dry text of a penal code to the deepest spiritual failings of the human condition. It demands that we just stop sleepwalking through our cultural norms.
And that brings the lens directly back to you listening right now, because this is where the philosophy has to meet your actual life. I really want you to reflect on the societal expectations you've internalized. Where are you choosing the cheap and easy institutional paths?
It doesn't even have to be strictly about marriage either.
No, exactly. Are there areas in your life right now where you are hiding behind a title, a legal contract, or a tradition simply to avoid doing the hard, painful work of dissolving your own ego?
Are you relying on the architecture of society to provide you with a sense of connection, rather than doing the internal work to become truly capable of it yourself?
It's a question that demands total honesty. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative angle to ponder on your own. We've spent this entire time dissecting this metaphor of marriage, the legal and social structure of it, as a fortress, a safe haven that protects the ego from the terrifying vulnerability of real love, a zoo enclosure that keeps us safe from the wild.
And if that safety net is the only thing keeping the herd together?
Exactly. What would happen if we completely dismantled it? If our current legal and social structures of marriage are just safe havens for the ego, what if they vanish tomorrow? What if the societal pressure to pair up, the legal contracts, and the animal husbandry matching systems were entirely erased?
That's a wild thought experiment.
Would humanity finally be forced into the spiritual fires to learn how to genuinely, truly love one another? Or would we just find ourselves entirely terrifyingly alone?